So good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. I know we're going to have people still probably coming in as we keep going, but we're going to have to keep this going so we can get through all of this. Thanks again to everybody for coming to this little town hall meeting that we have. Obviously, it's a big issue. Basically, what we're going to be visiting about is the water extinguishment credit rule that will affect agriculture in Pinal County. I'm Richie Kennedy, current president of Pinal County Farm Bureau. Earlier this year, we had a couple members bring this to our attention regarding these extinguishment credits. And to help to understand this issue and provide a venue for farmers and community members to learn more about how this issue affects them, this town hall was organized with assistance from City Councilman Dick Powell. We're going to have two presentations this evening, one from Joe Singleton and one from Mr. Powell. There are also staff members from the Arizona Department of Water Resources who will be available to answer questions. The structure for tonight's program is as follows. First, we will hear from Joe Singleton, followed by Dick Powell. Once their presentations are complete, we will take questions from the audience, which there are going to be runners from each side. As you guys have your questions at any time in this meeting while we're doing Q&A or even during the presentation, just kind of hold it up. Somebody from the side will grab it from you and they'll bring them up. And just so you guys know, we'll kind of filter through them. We'll try to answer as many as we can. But if there's some that are kind of the same, we'll try to group them together so we have basically all questions answered that we possibly can. I will be facilitating the questions and answers. I will be asking the questions and directing it to whoever is able to answer. Once we are through with our questions, we will allow the audience some time to provide any comments that they wish to share with the group. We're going to limit that to 3 minutes per comment, just to kind of save time, just so we can kind of keep rolling through this. Our first presenter this evening is going to be Mr. Joe Singleton. He is the Executive Director for the Pinal County Water Augmentation Authority. The Pinal County Water Augmentation Authority serves as a resource and partner for the development and augmentation of water resources for the benefit of all users in Pinal Active Management Area. The Pinal AMA is defined as our local water planning area by the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Joe was also the director of the Pinal County AMA when the current extinguishment rules were created and will be providing background on this issue. Mr. Singleton?
Thanks, Richie. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here.
We're going to ask you to go up front and speak to the...
Okay.
It's okay. And I meant to.
Is that better? Good evening, everyone. I am Joe Singleton, and I am the Executive Director of the Pinal County Water Augmentation Authority. And previous to that, I spent about 13 years with the Arizona Department of Water Resources, mostly in the Pinal Active Management Area, where I was working during the time that the Assured Water Supply rules were amended twice. As this issue has kind of percolated up through everybody's consciousness this year, Councilman Powell asked me to kind of share with all of you a little bit of the timeline on how some of these things were discussed and then later put into policy. And it actually goes back to about 2000 when Governor Hull instituted a Blue Panel Water Management Commission. And that commission, through about a good 2.5 years worth of work at least, came out with a set of recommendations. And one of the recommendations for the Pinal AMA was to kind of get our house in order in terms of our assured water supply rules. The rules that had been in place since the mid-90s allowed for a very generous portion of groundwater to be used on any piece of land, including desert land that had no water rights at all, for development that would never have to be replenished at all under the Assured Water Supply rules. And that is the main goal of the Assured Water Supply rules, is to look for a portion of groundwater use that development might be using in the future and cause it to be replenished into the aquifer for the long-term benefit of all the water users. A local group down here, taking those recommendations to heart, actually started discussing and looking at what they might want to do with the Assured Water Supply rules for the Pinal AMA. And there was a a lot of discussion over quite a bit of period of time during which the AMA's water budget was reviewed. A lot of discussion by a lot of parties. There were representatives from the cities, the counties, the irrigation districts, even some industrial water users. And after a lot of discussion, a lot of work, and the Groundwater Users Advisory Council had put together a subgroup to work on some of the more technical aspects of that. That group finally came out with a recommendation that went back through the Groundwater Users Advisory Council with a white paper that basically laid out a cause to go revise those assured water supply rules. The Director of Water Resources, hearing that from the community, then initiated a process, and I think probably by this time we're talking about 2006, 2007, to go look at amending those rules. Those rules were subsequently later amended. And what they took a good portion of that unreplenished groundwater, the groundwater allowance, out of the rules, put a much more modest piece in its place, and the reason I think a lot of you are here tonight, revised the way that extinguishment credits worked for the Pinal AMA. And one of the things that that white paper that the Groundwater Users Advisory Council sent back up to the State Department of Water Resources said is, hey, we looked at this and we don't think the current rules are actually consistent with our long-term water management goal down here, which is of a concern and a statutory requirement for the Department of Water Resources to take a look at. Part of the issue was that between the initial groundwater allowance and the way that the extinguishment credit process resulted in an additional value of groundwater that didn't need to be replenished, is if all of those things were to happen, you were actually talking about more water than there actually really was, which means none of it is going to be replenished at all. In fact, it was quite a bit more than what was actually there. Under the assured water supply rules to develop, not only do you need to be consistent with the management goal, which is what some of those extinguishment credits would speak to. It's the volume of water you won't have to replenish. But you need to reserve some supplies for future non-irrigation uses too. And so that's what folks were looking at the time that was determined wasn't real consistent with the long-term water management goal. Plus you may be, if you continued to, along with the implementation of those rules, you may wind up in a situation where you're using up a significant portion of all the groundwater down there, which isn't really all that good for anybody. So that was some of the thinking that was going on at the time. I believe in about late 2000 or early to mid 2009, and I think that those modified rules have been in place for about a year or so at that point, maybe a little longer. There was another group that approached the Department of Water Resources and wanted the rules subsequently changed again to take a look at the way that the extinguishment credits were valued specifically this time. And there was a subsequent modification to that part of the rule that kind of pushed back at the top the way in the initial years that the value on that extinguishment credit might decrease through time. I believe it caught up with the original one later. So the way that the values on those credits work is after 2054 that there is no subsequent value for extinguishment credits on farmland in recognition of the long-term water management goal of the AMA, which is to be at some point of sustainability somewhere in the future to where you're not overdrafting your aquifers down to zero to where there's no water in it. The actual statutory requirement reads to allow for the agricultural economy to continue as long as feasible while recognizing that you have to save water for future municipal and industrial uses.
Thank you, Joe. Our next presenter is going to be City Councilman Dick Powell, and I kind of jumped the gun earlier. As Mr. Powell comes around to the podium, if you will all stand, I forgot to start the salute with the flag. So if you'll all stand, Mr. Powell's going to start his.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. Mr. Powell is currently serving his 5th term in office. He has been a member of the City Council since June of '97. He operates a 50-year-old Casa Grande retail business, Powell's Feed and Supply. Mr. Powell will be sharing the potential impacts extinguishment credits may have on agriculture and the community.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank Joe Singleton. He's certainly an authority on water and has helped us a lot in guidance. I want to thank Sandra Fabrents from sending down people from ADWR. She couldn't be here tonight, but we do have people to answer questions. I want to thank Farm Bureau and the City of Casa Grande for helping us have this meeting tonight. This meeting tonight's to be informational. There may be opinions in here. We're not going to take a vote on anything. This is an informational meeting. And what started this is last year I went to a Farm Bureau meeting, and Tiffany Shedd, who's a farmer, got up and shared that one of her farm concerns is that this process was going to begin happening. And I think everybody thought she was smoking something because nobody knew what was going on, and a lot of just incredible, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Well, we found out she does exactly know what she's talking about. So as we got into it, anything I say tonight does not represent the City of Casa Grande, only myself and only my opinions. So as I say, right at this point in time, Farm Bureau of the City of Casa Grande haven't taken a position, but we're trying to get information out, and I want to try to represent the area of concerns that I've heard the most from, and also just go over a little bit of quick history and some of the availability problems. Here's an issue that this will probably sound pretty shocking to some people, but I think perhaps Arizona's biggest issue is to not overpopulate our state. And that's a real issue, a lot more than people think. John Wesley Powell, who was one of the first ones to bring the Powell name to Arizona, turned around and had an astute grasp of the obvious and said there's not enough water to water the land, which is very true. There's been fights over water from the beginning of time here in Arizona. There's a saying that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting, and that's how it's been a lot of the time. The ancient Hohokam that were here and had to leave in the 1400s basically had too many people and not enough water and had to leave. If we look back at the early leaders in our state with water, they had more opportunity than we have as I see it right now. But I think the initial move through the federal government to put in the dam system, to have flood control, to have water storage, to generate power and all those things was a tremendous move forward. Carl Hayden followed that up, and he had a dream of bringing water in to irrigate central Arizona and really boost the ag economy, and which he accomplished. One of the things that needs to be recognized is that the agricultural component has paid for most of the CAP, or a very good portion of the CAP project debt. The residential development that started in Arizona after World War II, and a guy named John F. Long came back from the war and invented something called tract homes. And it was off to the races after that. The Arizona leadership, and this is an opinion, has become addicted to residential development in preference to any of the other opportunities we have, as being one of the primary economic engines of our state, and to a fault. I think they're in denial about how much water we actually have to work with. Our leaders have embraced a concept called the Sun Corridor. And the Sun Corridor was started out of West Virginia, and they were doing research, and they were identifying, this was during the tsunami, the growth tsunami, they were trying to identify megapolitan areas in the United States that would be basically dense growth from one end to the other. They identified Arizona as having one that would go from Prescott to Sierra Vista. And there's obviously not any amount of water close to being able to accomplish that. So I just, to spend time on it and to put the spin on it, I wish we would address basically the water we do and what we can do for the economy with what we have. Also, the Sun Corridor would increase 24-hour temperature 7 to 10 degrees with that type of density. So it would be a little warm in there. Pinal County's comprehensive plan projects 6 million people living in Pinal County. And that's almost the amount of people we have in the state of Arizona. We have more than that, but it's a huge amount. And when some of the water projections said we had basically 3/4 to just over 1 million people that we could water. So that, in my mind, is also unrealistic. I think, you know, going back to John Wesley Powell, our state and our county need to get the concept that there isn't sufficient water to supply the land. We live in an arid area. And I think we really need to plan strategically and sustainably, and I think agriculture has to be a really important component of the picture. Other Western states right now are realizing the importance of agriculture and beginning to protect it and to make sure it gets watered again. And they've made the full circle. Recent article in the Republic, and I'm going to do some reading because a lot of this stuff is written down, but sharing information. A recent article in the Republic reported, as home construction picks up in the West Valley, water is increasingly on city leaders' minds. Cities that depend on Colorado River water could face severe shortages in the next 50 years. U of A professor Robert Glennon states that the handwriting is on the wall that the growth in central Arizona will outstrip the water supply. A 3.2 million acre-foot shortage on the Colorado River is projected within the next 50 years, which is basically even more than we take right now. And Arizona, because of the CAP, is subordinate on the Colorado River. So in a shortage, we're the first to take the shortage. We're subordinate to Nevada and California. In a recent study by the Colorado Demand and Supply Study by the Bureau of Reclamation, they concluded that under the worst case scenarios, demand could exceed supply by as much as 50% within the next 50 years. It notes without meaningful changes in our approach to water in the West, the water supply for our arid civilization may prove to be a mirage and not an oasis. The Future at Pinal, which was a study that was put out by the Morrison Institute during the time when the growth tsunami was going on, and it noted that M&I water, municipal and industrial water, is different from ag water. And that in a drought time or in a shortage time, you can cut back the ag water. But if the residential component is completely dependent on our water supply, we're not going to fallow fields, we're going to fallow homes. And that's something that I think they can get pretty serious about. We had some of these that we handed out when you came in. I don't know how many people have one. If you don't, I'm going to read from it for you. This is basically a notice of final rulemaking, Title 12 Natural Resources from the Arizona Administration Registry, Secretary of State. And it talks about the new rules in our AMA. And it says, the management goal in the Pinal AMA, where predominantly agricultural economy exists, is to allow development of non-irrigation uses and to preserve existing agricultural economies for as long as feasible, consistent with the necessity to preserve future water supplies for non-irrigation uses. And that, in the working papers, was made to understand that reliable means dependable and available water supply for future development. One method of demonstrating the groundwater use is consistent with the management goal of the AMA is through a mechanism of extinguishment of grandfathered groundwater rights. When a grandfathered groundwater right is extinguished, the department issues credits, and they can be used by a developer to meet the consistency with the management goal requirements for the AWA. The AWA is assured water supply, which you have to have before you can develop. Some more reading, but I apologize. Prior to 2007, the existing assured water supply rules for the Pinal AMA allowed for the amount of credits issued for the extinguishment of a grandfathered water rights in the Pinal AMA to remain at the same each year with no reduction over time. The assured water supply rules for the Pinal AMA were amended in 2007 to provide for a gradual reduction in the amount of credits given for the extinguishment of grandfathered rights, depending on when the extinguishment occurred. And this one was set to take place in 2010, but was postponed. One of the major reasons, and I think this is important, one of the major reasons for the 2007 amendment was the development in the Pinal AMA was increasing rapidly, and the rate of development was projected to continue into the foreseeable future. Some of the development was anticipated to result in the extinguishment of irrigation grandfathered water rights for extinguishment credits, anticipated to result in the extinguishment of, irrigation grandfathered rights. The growth combined with the rapid development is going to lead to an overallocation, which Joe had mentioned, and that was one of the concerns. And that's basically one of the main reasons was because of the projection of the growth rate in 2007. The next paragraph begins, due to the downturn in the Arizona real estate market, development in the Pinal AMA has slowed dramatically. However, with the first reduction in allocation factors approaching, several irrigation districts in the AMA have expressed concerns. And the concerns were kind of twofold. One, they had bond issues to pay off. And number two, there were some of the big developers, they were afraid if they left at 100% and left fallow ground there, that you take a big chunk out of an irrigation district and it affects the ability to deliver water to everybody in that district, and that was a huge concern. These are available back there, and anybody that wants to pick them up before you leave, if you haven't, it'd be good to do it. But basically, under the new plan, this year, here's how it works. You get an acre and a half, acre foot, times the number of acres that you have, times an allocation factor. And the allocation factor goes from 100% to zero over a number of years. So this year, if you convert, you can get 100% credits, and the water credits available would be roughly enough credits to develop with. You'd have basically the amount of water that you would need to develop your property, or if a developer bought it, that he would need to develop the property. In year one, which is next year, you have 94%. In year 5, you have 72%. In year 10, you have 62%. In year 15, you have 52%. In year 20, you have 42%. And this systematically devalues your property, because anybody that goes to the bank, one of the things that they really will loan money on is the fact of the conversion ratio there, that you can provide enough water. If you convert it, the bank has to take the property, they can convert it into to the water credits. And in the year 2054, there's no water. Now, if you continue to farm and you can continue to get wet water, you can farm as long as you want. You just won't have any value from extinguishment credits. And if you can get wet water, and that's going to be a big issue as time goes on, if the irrigation districts fall apart and can't deliver those type of things. But that is a huge issue. The second part of that I was just going to read is one of the things that, as I say, surprised me so much is the lack of transparency, and it certainly was not intentional, but the lack of transparency as far as knowledge of people in the irrigation districts on what was going to happen and what their land values, what would happen to their land values. There's a gentleman here that went to his banker, and he said 60% or more of what I count as your equity is the ability to be able to convert those credits. And I'm scared if they start being reduced. The irrigation districts agreed, they went back, and nobody should beat up anybody on any of the things that are happening. The ADWR, they're doing their job. They're doing what they're asked to do. The irrigation districts, they did their job. They got us an extra 5 years before this started. And For doing that, it said the irrigation districts will not seek any additional amendments to the allocation factors for extinguishment credits set forth in the AAC R12-15-725, even if the rate of development in Pinal County does not significantly increase by January, nor will they encourage any other person to seek such amendment or assist any other persons in seeking such an amendment. So I think that whether they felt it or not, I think that's part of the reason that so many people weren't informed and didn't understand what you're looking at. As we look at the economic impacts, the economic impact study that was done on that report is way totally off the mark. The central Pinal County, as the report notes, enjoys a predominantly agricultural economy, unlike Phoenix and Tucson MAAs, where they have metropolitan economies. Pinal AMA's major industry is agriculture. The ag support business are hugely invested, and others are planning to locate here. And right now we have 2 mega businesses that are building here in Casa Grande that are dairy related and are here because of that. That was part of their statement as they came here, because of the dairy business and the availability of milk. But the dairies themselves are protected. They're considered industrial, but the fields that they grow their alfalfa or their feed in aren't. So they're in the same boat. For every square mile of farmland, an average of $500,000 is spent in the local economy. For every rooftop developed, it costs the community $1.50 to $2 for every dollar of construction-related revenue realized. And we're happy with growth. We want people to come be part of our community, but people need to understand development does not equal improvement in an economy in a lot of ways. It's fine to grow, but communities also, which we have now, we have people interested in mainly in a lot of situations because of our agriculture, in commercial and industrial investment. The malls, the commercial and general businesses could see a reduction of 40 cents on the dollar without agriculture, if agriculture just disappeared in our community. It's a real concern to the cities for this type of reason. Declining economies and the loss of jobs is catastrophic for communities. Reduction of land values and migration of extinguishment credits, both north and south, closer to the Tucson and the Phoenix AMA, where developers are putting more pressure, would spell disaster for the futures of Casa Grande, Coolidge, Eloy, Red Rock, and the surrounding county areas. That's pretty scary. Here's something to mull over. In 2010, the cash receipts from the crop and livestock in Pinal County totaled $845,485,000. How would you like to have an industry like that go away? Pinal is second only to Yuma most times in cash receipts. They talk about the goal of the AMA, and that is legally what they need to address. And the management goal of the Pinal AMA says where a predominantly agricultural economy exists, it is to allow development of non-agricultural or non-irrigation uses and to preserve existing agricultural economies for as long as feasible, consistent with the necessity to preserve future water supplies for non-irrigation uses. And as I say, the supplies for non-irrigation were changed to preserve future water supplies for non-irrigated areas should be interpreted as ensuring a long-term, reliable supply of water for municipal and industrial uses. The only way I can see that we can meet this goal is to go back to the former 100% credits for extinguishment of water rights. And you can look at it from two sides here, and truthfully, it's happening at one of the very worst times it could happen to us. We don't have development going on. If farmers, if they wanted to sell, who are they going to sell it to? A lot of land has been put by investors into ag land right now, and they're holding it. Now, this is when they talk about the water preservation. This is happening. And I think it's up to 85% in the Central Arizona Irrigation and Drainage District have basically 85% investor-owned with leasebacks to farmers. So they're able to continue, instead of following any land, they're able to continue to farm it until the reasonable time comes to convert it, if that time ever comes. If it doesn't, they can continue to farm it. But if the investors are forced right now to have to sell that land, their tax rates go way up and their land value goes way down with the conversion rates. If you can only convert, if you only bring half the water credits to your property, your value of your property is about 50 cents or 50% of what it would have been before. And if I was a developer and I'm going to people and I'd say, you know, I'm not ready for 5 or 10 years, I'll offer you half of what your land's worth because that's what it's going to be when I'm ready to develop. And if we let farming go on as long as it's feasible, we can achieve that. Farmers, as I say, will farm till it's not feasible to farm anymore, and then they will make a decision. They need to be able to continue to get 100% conversion credits, as do the agriculture that's related to the investment community that's tied up a lot of property. And the only way you can tie up and guarantee reliable water for municipal and industrial uses is to have some land that you own right now that you can protect it on. You can't do it according to this. So I'm not sure how you do that. It needs to be, you need to be able to convert that, and they're sitting there. They want to develop when the time comes. Now's not the time. And you've got farmers and you've got investors both over the fence. As I say, if an investor right now, if he converts, he can't pay the tax bills on the land he'd have. But if he doesn't convert, by the time he gets ready to build, he may have very little water credits left. So it's going to be a big expense to him. He's going to lose value. The farmer is the very same way. If he can continue to farm, he'll farm till it's not profitable anymore, and then he can make that decision. Let the market be the guide. When you can't make a living at it, you're going to sell it. If they're forced to make a decision, I have to get out now or take less value for my farmland, you're going to have people that aren't going to be financed as easily. You're going to have people that by the time that they may be able to convert, and every acre in Pinal County is certainly not going to go into development. We need agriculture. So basically the last thing I have on here is a Arizona Prop 207. And Arizona Prop 207 reads, Arizona Proposition 207 was a 2006 ballot initiative officially titled the Private Property Rights Protection Act. And it requires the government to reimburse landowners when regulations result in a decrease in the property's value, and also prevents governments from exercising eminent domain on behalf of a private party. Further down in it, it reads, Proposition 207, which was officially titled the Private Property Rights Protection Act, has been codified in Arizona Revised Statute Section 12-1134. The Act provides that if the existing rights to use, divide, sell, or possess private real property are reduced by any land use enacted after the date of the property is transferred to the owner, and such reductions reduces the fair market value of the property, the owner is entitled to just compensation. And I don't want to see this happen, but I also don't want to see the water credits go away, because it's a taking of value. And, you know, if somebody can struggle and farm forever and has the water, yeah, they can do that. But you have to be able to get wet water, and you have to be able to have it delivered to you. And when you sell it, if you eventually do, if you get rid of it, you're the same value as bare desert. You can sell water rights for farming, but if you sell it for anything else at the end, you're the same value as bare desert is. So that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Before we take questions from the audience, if Liz Foster and Stephen Shedd will raise their hands, if you guys kind of look around, these are the people that are going to be taking your questions. I don't have a spot to speak here, but one of the comments I wanted to make that everybody understands is that this affects all grandfathered water rights, which includes type 2 grandfathered rights, which follow the same extinguishment plan. Like I said, I just wanted to throw that out there so everybody could kind of understand that as well, because some of us do own type 2 grandfathered water rights. Before we start with questions and answers, the Q&A part, I would like to introduce Jeff Tandler, statewide AMA administrator, and Doug's out in the audience. There he is, in the back. Doug, by the door. Doug Dunham, legislative liaison and special assistant to the director from the Arizona Department of Water Resources. They will also be available to help with answering questions, and thank you both for being here. As I mentioned earlier, you will need to write your questions on the note cards that we provided earlier. If you do not have a note card, those same two people that I mentioned before, Stephen and Liz, they will give you one. Raise your hand and they will get you one. And also, like I said, they will retrieve them and bring them up here as we go. So I guess we will start with the questions, and if any more questions arise, just keep them coming. First question, how does this affect domestic wells?
Okay, I want to make sure this is on. Can you hear me?
I don't think it is on, Jeff.
Right now.
How about now?
Yep.
Okay. Domestic wells are not affected by this. Domestic wells typically one that pumps 35 gallons per minute or less, and because of that relatively low pumping capacity, those are termed exempt wells. They're exempt from the need for any kind of grandfathered groundwater right. They don't have to measure, report, or pay a pump tax. So this extinguishment credits would not affect exempt wells.
Next question, how does Prop 207 apply when it is exempt in cases of laws that do not directly regulate an owner's land? Anybody want to address that?
The one thing I will say, I believe there have been a couple of suits in the past that have determined that groundwater is a public resource. So would there be a taking if it's involving groundwater? That's unlikely. We can look at that further. That's about all I'll say on that.
Mr. Powell?
I would just comment that also, and the first thing I'll tell you, I'm sure not a lawyer, got a brother that is, but I'm not. I think that basically the extinguishment credits constitute value of your property. When you convert, the ability to convert and have the extinguishment credits available are what determine value on your property. And if any rule reduces the value on your property, I think that you have the right to be asked to have it paid for. If you want to take the extinguishment credits away, have the state pay for it each time they take them. Pay the guy back. Don't take them, because that adds to the value of it. So I think very definitely that a lawyer, and I'm not one, could make a very strong case that basically in 1980 you had ground rights and you had the rights to extinguish them, and those were worth, that's where the value was in the extinguishment credits, as well as the water rights. The water rights may not belong to anybody, but the extinguishment credits belong to the owner. If you reduce the amount he has, you reduce the value of his land. I think he might be eligible to be compensated.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. How do extinguishment credits affect type 2 water rights? If I have a certificate with 150 acre feet, when I sell my certificate in 2030, am I still selling 150 acre feet?
I don't know if it's the same.
I don't think it is, but it'll be in there.
Okay. One moment.
Nope. They're not showing all the statutory language on that, Jeff.
Yeah, it's in the code.
You need the full
Arizona code that shows it.
Doug might know. You want me to try to answer, because I'm going to edge, unless you got the whole thing with you.
No, go for it.
Okay, if I try.
No, go ahead.
Jeff, if I may?
Yeah,
Sure.
let Doug do it.
Okay.
Reduction,
I don't think it applies to type 2s.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
The reduction is only for the extinguishment process. If you hold a grandfathered right of any type, be that a irrigation grandfathered right, a type 1 or a type 2, the volume associated with those rights never decrease. They will stay in place forever. So, for example, if you did try to sell the right, the type 2, because those are portable, if you did try to sell that to another party, the volume of that certificate will remain in place. It's not changed.
Doug, one related question. If someone wanted to, if they had a type 2 right and they wanted to extinguish that, is there a reduction over time for the amount of credits that they would get, extinguishment credits that they get for extinguishing a type 1 or a type 2?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember. I have to look. I know the language was pretty clear for the IGFRs, but for the type 1 or type 2, I honestly don't remember off the top of my head if that was the same reduction in the IGFR. The old original rules from 95 had them together, but the rules were changed.
We'll
We'll look into that, yeah. Sorry.
Doug, if you don't mind, why don't you just sit up here real quick, just in case.
I want to be back by the door.
I know
can
you
sneak
do.
out, you know?
Why only Pinal County, if this is a law, it should be all of Arizona? Why is a developer more powerful about land that is not his?
The way I would answer that, in the Tucson and Phoenix active management areas, there are provisions for extinguishing a grandfathered right for extinguishment credits. They are much more strict in Prescott. They're much more strict than what you're finding in the Pinal AMA. So if anything, there's a much more generous allowance for extinguishment credits in the Pinal AMA.
In 2054, when the extinguishment credits are reduced to 0, will farmland be worth the same as desert land?
That's a narrow way of looking at the question. Let me answer that a little bit more broadly. Property, if someone is wanting to buy property to develop it, there's a number of factors that would go into the value. Location, being close to infrastructure, a number of different things. If the developer was being served by a designated provider, or if they had already gotten a certificate of assured water supply approved on joining the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District, then they would not need the extinguishment credits. So it's not to say whether if there was property that had extinguishment credits versus property that did not have those, it may or may not make a difference to a developer or to a purchaser of that property.
Anybody else?
I would just comment that the market value, if you take it out of agriculture, if you leave it in agriculture, you can continue to, like I say, to use the water as long as you can get wet water. If you take it out of agriculture, you're looking at basically the same value as bare desert. Then the factors you're talking about come into effect on location and infrastructure and those type of things that can help control the value of it. But basically, either case, you're buying land without any water.
Is one final thing I'll say, is there value to extinguishment credits? Yes, definitely. That value, it's going to depend on when and time and a number of other things. We don't have a set value on what extinguishment credits will go for. That's free market, basically.
Next question. What was DWR's rationale for requiring the irrigation districts to not pursue changing the extinguishment credits in return for the 2007 extension?
I am going to defer to Doug on that.
I got to admit, I wasn't in the room when that happened, so my understanding was that, okay, sorry. I wasn't in the room when that happened. I don't know specifically what the discussions were, Is anybody from the districts that were here that were aware of that? No? Okay. The discussion that I had with other folks within the department is the concern was at some point agricultural production is going to, or lands are going to change over, and there is going to be an impact to the districts when that happens. And so that instead of changing the rules, what needs to happen is an economic planning on how to minimize those negative impacts. That was the intent of the letter. It wasn't intended to be a gag rule. It wasn't intended to be anything like that.
Next question. What is the difference between type 1 and type 2? Please explain this.
Sure. If you irrigated property between the years 1975 and 1980, then you qualify for an irrigation grandfathered groundwater right. And that stays with the property, that goes with the property if you sell it. If you decided that you wanted to retire that land for a non-irrigation use, such as put a golf course on it, then you could, there are a few restrictions, but in general you could retire that irrigation right to a type 1 non-irrigation right that stays with the land, and you would get a certain amount of water, roughly 3 acre-feet per acre, maybe a little bit more or less depending on a few factors. But that would let someone use the water that had been used for irrigation and put that to use for a non-irrigation purpose like a chili packing plant or a golf course or something like that. Again, that stays with the land. A type 2 non-irrigation right is one that was based on historic 1975 to 1980 use of water for a non-irrigation purpose. So again, we're an irrigation right, 1975, 1980 for irrigation. Type 1 right comes out of an irrigation right and they're converting it for non-irrigation use. Type 2 is for historic non-irrigation use. So between 1975 1980, let's say you had a sand and gravel outfit or something like that, you would get a type 2 right for the amount that you historically used annually. One unique thing about a type 2 right is it's not tied to the land. You can essentially move it or use it to withdraw water from anywhere within the same active management area. And it's considered personal property, not real property. So it can be sold apart from the land.
Anybody else?
Nope, that's a good explanation.
All right, next question, and I think I'm going to let it pass on to you again, Jeff, because it kind of showed up just at the right time. Are extinguished credits portable?
Yes, they are. Within the same active management area, if you took property and extinguished the grandfathered right, you would end up with extinguishment credits. Those are no longer tied to the land. You could use those to develop, or you could sell those to a developer to develop anywhere within the active management area. They would be able to use that toward proving an assured water supply. So it doesn't, that once it's an extinguishment credit, it's not tied to the land.
Well, you're getting them all, Jeff. How does this affect a 100-year assured water certificate?
Trying to think of how simply to explain that. If someone wants to subdivide and create a development, they need to prove a 100-year assured water supply. They need to prove that the water is going to be there for the next 100 years. One of the things they have to do is prove physical availability, make sure the water supply itself is there. They cannot use 100% groundwater to prove where the water is going to come from. However, they do have a couple ways of using some groundwater toward their assured water supply. One is if a developer has extinguishment credits, then they can use those toward proving the assured water supply. The other is if it's a designated provider, they get a particular groundwater allowance the extinguishment credits and the groundwater allowance, the idea behind those was to allow for a transition from pumping groundwater to getting renewable supplies, because it can take some time to get access to renewable supplies in the future.
Do you mind if I add something to that?
No,
Do you
go ahead.
I'll go for it.
Hi, I'm just going to add on to what Jeff said. The extinguishment credits basically represent a portion of the groundwater demand for the 100 years that the subdivision's going to need to use water. And the extinguishment credits represent a portion of that groundwater use that does not have to be replaced. So if it looked like the subdivision was going to need to use 1,000 acre feet a year, its 100-year demand would be 100,000 acre feet of groundwater, and it would have to replenish that volume in excess of a groundwater allowance and those extinguishment credits. So the bigger that number is on the extinguishment credit added to the groundwater allowance, the less replenishment you're going to actually see back.
Thank you. Can San Carlos IDD be extinguished and still be irrigated since it is a federal water right?
We do not have a provision for extinguishing an irrigation district. The extinguishment provisions are only for grandfathered groundwater rights, which would be irrigation rights, type 1 rights, and type 2 rights.
Next question. Why can a developer buy desert land with no water, but a farmer cannot do the same? Wouldn't a solution be to make it more beneficial for a developer to buy the land already being used for farming?
And with the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, one of the restrictions that was put in place is if you irrigated between 1975 and 1980, then you have a grandfathered right. Your irrigation is grandfathered in. Flip side, you cannot bring in new or raw desert land for irrigation. It's one of the provisions of the groundwater code to try and get a handle on how much groundwater is being used. A developer can potentially take raw desert land and develop that if they can show that they have access to water, either through groundwater that gets replenished or through a renewable supply such as CAP surface water. As Joe explained, if a developer has extinguishment credits, those can be used to offset the amount of water that has to be replenished. There might have been a second part. What was the second part to that question?
Trying to think. No. Second part of the question was, wouldn't a solution be to make it more beneficial for a developer to buy the land already being used for farming?
Yeah, we'd like to see that from a water management standpoint, because then the water that had been being used for irrigation is now used for a development rather than additional land being used for a development. So we'd like to see that. That's not, a developer could, however, develop raw desert land under the right circumstances.
I got to assume the next question on that issue is going to be, but previously you answered that these certificates can't, or the credits can be moved away from the ground that they were on.
Right.
So how does that stop that from happening?
I guess I would say that, yeah, an extinguishment credit can be moved apart from the land. If you've got cases where someone purchases property and it's got an irrigation right on it, and then the developer has the irrigation right, and if they extinguish it, then I would say it's likely that they would use the extinguishment credits for development on that property that they already bought. They could conceivably use those credits in another location, though.
I'm just going to comment, that's one of the reasons that there's a great value in extinguishment credits, is because it is a way to bring, to get an assured water supply. One of the things that is problematic, it started out basically where the suggestion that you bought farmland and you a developer bought the farmland. He had the extinguishment credits with it, which would just about give him enough water to develop his property. And that changed with some of the water banks and the credits and the different things that allow a producer or a developer to go out basically on bare land. A case in point, and it's not here in Pinal County, is the Superstition Vistas development, which is a area the size of Tempe, Mesa, Chandler, and Gilbert, and it doesn't have a drop of water on it. And they're wanting to develop it. It's state land. They can buy it at a good price, and so what they have to do is find water availability to transfer from where it is to where they want it to be. And that's one of the big issues with using water. We would rather the farmers sell it to the developers here, so the developers develop here and we have local development instead of having those credits end up somewhere else, that they're more desirable and more marketable. But that is the case right now, is you can buy bare desert, and if you can get the paperwork done on it to get water transferred to it. Some of it's Indian water. SRP just came in possession of 130,000 acre feet of Indian water to be used in the SRP areas, and some of that is earmarked to be used in the Superstition Vistas to develop on land without water, when wouldn't it make a lot more sense to be developing down here where you have interstate infrastructure and everything in place, and use it where the water is instead of transferring water to where there isn't water.
Now, one thing I'll add to that in case a question comes up, a small or a relatively small chunk of Superstition Vistas is located within the Pinal AMA. Most of it is located in the Phoenix AMA. Just in case a question comes up, if to the extent that extinguishment credits were used to help prove an assured water supply, that would only be able to be used for the portion that's in Pinal AMA. So in other words, extinguishment credits can't be transported over to Phoenix AMA to prove that part of the development.
You know, and that is absolutely, I don't know that any water would go from Pinal AMA basically because it's such a small amount. But that was an indication of what some of the developers want to do, is buy bare desert and bring the water to it. And what it does is, we only have so much water in the state of Arizona. And when the water is transferred into an area that big, they could put 1 million people or more there. When they take up that water, that's water that can't go anywhere else. And so basically we're taking our water supply and we're saying we're going to put it over here to make a lot of money on cheap state land and develop this thing, and it's close to the East Valley and it's convenient for developers in that area. But that is the initial question, is it would have been best. One of the things that happened is some of the developers and some of the planners started saying, I don't want to pay that damn much money for farmland. You know, they're getting too much money for their farms, and I'd rather buy a desert and move water to it. And one of the things that you can kind of compare that to, if you had a $300,000 house, and they told you at the end, if you sold your house, or if you sold your land, you had to take the house off of it because that was the value-added part of having the water there. When it's finally extinguished, you wouldn't like it very much, and that's kind of what the boat that the farmer's in right now.
Go ahead.
To follow up that point, as Joe mentioned when this meeting first started, the Pinal GUAC, Groundwater Users Advisory Council, was examining the old assured water supply rules, and there were two pieces to to calculate how much water a subdivision could use without having to replace that. So between those two pieces, and that would be the basic groundwater allowance, which in the old rules were based on your population of that subdivision, in combination with any extinguishment credits may come from an IGFR. When they looked at the total numbers of that, what they found was that you could extinguish 1 acre of farmland, and there was enough credits generated, you could develop 2 more additional acres of raw desert land, and that's what they saw. You're retiring 1 acre of ag, and there's enough credits being generated to support 2 additional acres. So you get a 3-to-1 bang. And that was part of the fear that these credits were being overcalculated and overallocated, and then eventually that would cause more groundwater use than what's currently going on instead of slowly decreasing it. And that ultimately would impact the farmers that wanted to stay here because more groundwater would be pumped out from underneath them, and then thus speeding up when it would no longer be economically feasible to pump. So you're absolutely right, Mr. Powell, that moving that water off farmland was one of the concerns and one of the reasons that the rules were changed.
Thank you, Doug. What other groundwater user gave up water to avoid the overallocation?
You're talking about M&I?
I gotta assume so. The person that asked the question, is it referring to M&I as far as groundwater user? Giving up to M&I water? Nobody's claiming it.
It was basically, they said that they overallocated the water basically in the rule, and I was just curious which other groundwater user has tried to make up the overallocation.
Okay.
Let me try, and I don't know that you'll at all find this a satisfying answer, but Type 1 water rights that somebody owns that might want to go extinguish to put a subdivision in would be in exactly the same situation as these irrigation rights on those kind of lands that we're talking about. But I think one of the substantive differences in there is when land comes in as a subdivision, there's separate rules that basically say you have to account for the groundwater you're using, and you may have to put some of it back. That's kind of one of the overarching things we're talking about with the extinguishment credits. When you look at the agricultural sector, they have never been subjected to any of that. So a lot of the back and forth I've heard over the last 15 years is, okay, but the farmers don't have to replenish any water. And then what you'll hear back a lot of times from the ag community is, yeah, but we paid all the property tax debt to make sure you could put the CAP canal in. And there's something to both sides of that argument.
Thank you, Joe. On handout number 1, page 1, last paragraph states, one method of demonstrating that groundwater use is consistent with the management goal of the AMA is through a mechanism for the extinguishment of grandfathered water rights. What were the other methods?
Other methods include ways of either using a renewable supply, something other than groundwater, or joining the CAGRD, who would replenish the excess groundwater that's withdrawn. Another way is if it's it's a designated provider. If the provider has a groundwater allowance, then that in a sense works like extinguishment credits, where that water does not have to be replenished, and so is found to be consistent with the management goal of the AMA. Anything I'm forgetting?
Instead of preserving water for possible development on desert land, why not require the conversion of ag land for M&I?
Yeah.
I think the only water, in my opinion, that I think is necessarily being preserved for the desert land is what is now in the rules, a much smaller and modest portion for a groundwater allowance that every development would get, whether it's on raw desert land or agricultural land. In the previous version of the rules between 1995 and 2007, there was a significant groundwater allowance that could almost bring the whole development in without any additional means needed to meet the consistency with management goal requirement, whether it was getting extinguishment credits or enrolling in the GRD. The first rule change in 2007, I think did a fairly good job of addressing that. So the groundwater allowance today is much more modest. So to me, that's the only amount of water really being preserved for development. I think the second part of the question is, you know, why not require M&I development on agricultural land? I think the original Groundwater Management Act kind of contemplated that that's what would happen. I think for those of us that have been involved in the past or still are involved with the Department of Water Resources, I think what we found wasn't exactly what the folks probably intended in 1979, 1980 when they were putting some of that stuff together.
I'm going to stop for just a quick second. Those of you that want to speak in the comment section, we still probably have half a dozen or a little bit more questions left. Those of you guys that want to speak in the comment section, if you guys want to just put your name and who you're affiliated with on a card and pass it to the same folks, I'll just kind of go in order as they come up when we get to that point. So just kind of keep that in mind. Next question. I plan on passing my family farm to my children. Is it going to be too expensive for my children to farm our land in 20 years? What is the future for our young farmers in Pinal County?
That's a good question. I cannot predict the future. So I will be watching with you all to see what the future holds on that.
Who benefits from reclaimed water?
Anyone could benefit from reclaimed water if a water provider is able to also provide treated effluent or reclaimed water. That's water that's not just sent down a wash, say, it's not wasted. It is reuse of water. It could be used for landscaping uses in a subdivision. In some cases, if the price were right, it could be used for farming, depending on the crop. It could be used for golf course watering. So it could benefit any of the sectors. And it can be recharged for future withdrawal and use. So it can be stored for the future.
Let me add to that, and I think those are all good things. The other thing that reclaimed water has going for it is generally there's almost a hierarchy in the way water is regulated in this state. And the most regulated water in this state is groundwater inside of an active management area. I'll say that's my opinion, but I think most people would probably tell you the same thing. For a lot of the state regulation concerning water, what you'll find is the further you get away from groundwater in an active management area, the more lenient some of the things that might restrict groundwater use in an active management area are. So in my mind, one of the benefits to being able to use reclaimed water is it's accounted for differently under a lot of state law. For example, if you're trying to live under an allotment for a golf course that's allowed to use so many acre-feet of water per year in order to comply with its requirements, you can use more effluent than you could groundwater just by the way that the state accounts for that.
And there's currently an incentive where if you use 100% effluent on a golf course, then you are basically freed from the conservation requirement. If you use any non-ground water, then your conservation requirement does apply. But that was an incentive from years ago to get effluent used and not just wasted.
Mr. Powell?
I was just going to add to that the reclaimed water can be used in a matter of different ways. Chandler and Gilbert and some of the others have settlement ponds, which also serve as riparian areas and are part of their parks and rec. We have plans here in Casa Grande to have settlement ponds, which we would get the recharge credits for. Well, we would get credits for storage credits, and at the end of the Santa Cruz goes through Casa Grande, and we turn some of the effluent into it to be recaptured at the other end. If you have an injection well, you can get 50% of what's absorbed between the release point and the capture point, and then the rest through an injection well. So there's some really good ways to use reclaimed water, and it's going to become, some people are drinking it right now, believe it or not. That's happening, and some of it's cleaner than the water coming out of your tap, but the thought of it doesn't go very good. So
This question is for Joe Singleton. How is Pinal County going to augment water?
The quick answer is any way I can. Some of the things that we have been looking at is talk to Casa Grande about where we might be able to interact with the project that Councilman Powell just spoke of. Had some preliminary discussions with some of the M&I subcontractors in this area and how we can maximize those supplies that they already have available to them under contract. And continue to work with our contract holders and the irrigation districts on putting as much water down here as we can. And in my mind, the best kind is the kind that stays under our long-term control and not somebody else's.
Next question. When agriculture loses its extinguishment credits, where do those or who do those credits go to?
If the owner of an irrigation right chooses to extinguish that right, then the credits would go to the person that extinguished them, i.e. the irrigation right holder. Then at that point, the person that's holding the extinguishment credits, they can hang on to those or they can sell them to anyone they wish within the same AMA. So if the question is kind of asking, do the extinguishment credits automatically go to a developer? Not automatically. They can be held by the person that extinguished the irrigation right, if that's the farmer, then the farmer can hold those. Now,
that's my question. I'm not asking if you extinguish them. When they automatically leave our land in 2054, where have they gone?
Jeff, let me try.
go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I guess if they go anywhere, where they're going is back to the aquifer to account for groundwater that is already gone.
But isn't it a case where one of the biggest replenishments is agricultural use, where isn't it when you put water on the land, it's sinking down? I believe that we're one of the largest replenishers we don't get credit for it, but agriculture is one of the largest replenishers when we're using CAP water on that ground instead of our pumping because we have those IGRs. My question though is that that's going back in the aquifer, and that used to be a credit a developer could use for their assured water supply.
Tiffany?
And it disappears. Where did it go?
Tiffany, well, you're already done, but they couldn't hear you, and so I was going to say, we weren't having any comments, but if you wanted to make that comment again. Gotcha. All right. We'll let them answer it then. Thank you. We understand.
Okay, I don't know that there's necessarily a good answer to your question, but I think conceptually that the way things are structured and the way I've always looked at it is like this. Right now, I think through some of the process that we described earlier and looking at the water budget down here and activities like that, what it looked like is that the Pinal AMA, at least for the time being, was actually a net gain on water every year in terms of we're not losing outflows in a negative way to the Tucson AMA to the south or losing water to the north to the Phoenix AMA. Between what we're getting from mountain front recharge, stream channel recharge, and some other things like that, we're actually a net gain. And for a long time, if you talk to folks who were involved in the process, the number we were using to represent that gain was about 82,000 acre feet a year. Later, it looked like it was probably actually closer to 92,000 acre feet a year, so even a little better than some of what we were initially looking at. I think the issue with the extinguishment credits going down over time, to me, recognizes this. We're already using a whole lot more than 90,000 acre feet of groundwater a year. I think, probably 5 years ago when I was still working for the state and I talked to the districts, I mean, let alone what they're able to do now where they can augment a lot of their activities with CAP water, that's going to go away through time. But even when they just have to rely on groundwater for the growers to grow the crops, I think the two bigger districts, and Brian and Ron are both here, they can make gestures at me if I'm wrong. But I think when I asked them about what they thought they could sustain for long-term pumping at the time, I think they both told me probably about 200,000 acre feet a year. So if that is true, and I think it's not entirely inconsistent with what we're seeing for water use out of the ag sector now, at least in the bigger districts, if that's true, we're still using up maybe in excess of 300,000 acre feet a year beyond what all those net gains are. So I think that's what the extinguishment credit to me represents, is when you look at the conversion factor on that water right through time, if you're going to continue farming, fine. But if you're going to turn it into development, which needs to show that there was a 100-year water supply there in a way that was consistent with the long-term management goal of the AMA, it's going to lose some value through time, because what it represents is groundwater you don't have to put back, and the actual groundwater it has to call on in our aquifers through time looks like it's getting less and less every year.
Mr. Powell?
I was just going to add to that, the notice of final rulemaking says that when a grandfathered ground right is extinguished, the department issues credits that can be used by a developer to meet the consistency with the management goal requirement of an assured water supply determination.
Everybody agrees?
And that's to assume that you couldn't sell it to another farmer.
What I was heading toward was, yes, ultimately the developer is going to be the one who has the most need for the extinguishment credit.
But would you be able to sell an extinguished ag right? You have to convert it to get extinguishment credits.
If you take an irrigation right and extinguish that, you get credits. You could sell those credits to another farmer to hold. You could hang on to them for speculative value.
Now, if you converted them and when you extinguished to M&I, though, you couldn't do that.
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
If when you extinguish, you're saying I extinguish my ag water and I get so many credits for that.
Right.
Because I've converted them to M&I. So you couldn't sell back to agriculture, could you?
Well, I guess the distinction I'm saying, you've got a bunch of credits which can be held by a particular party who happens to be a farmer. The farmer could not use those credits to farm with.
Next question. Is it easier to oppose the law or to oppose the individuals who are manipulating the law?
We recognize that not everyone will agree with the law, and we are happy to have conversations with anyone who wants to debate the law or understand it better or possibly make changes.
A farmer must extinguish ag use water rights in order to convert. Will the state wait for attrition in ag, or will it start distributing the 6% as it acquires it, putting more pressure on our water resources?
Read that one more time through.
All right. A farmer must extinguish ag use water rights in order to convert. Will the state wait for attrition in ag, or will it start distributing the 6% as it acquires it, putting more pressure on our water resource?
6%, I think, is the reduction they're referring to. You had 100 credits this year. Next year, you're down to 94, so you have a 6% loss in water credits. Where do those go?
Well, there is a schedule for how the allocation does reduce over time. And initially it goes from 100 in 2013 to 94 in 2014. So there's initially a 6% that does the ramping down kind of levels off a little bit more as you get closer to 2054. Not sure what the other part of the question is.
Well, I think the main part of the question was if next year I lose 6% of the water extinguishment credits, what happens to that? You've got 6% gone from a whole lot of acreages. Is that converted into more water ability through the AMA, or what happens to that?
Well, I guess that's similar to Joe's response to a previous question. That goes to the aquifer to benefit the aquifer.
How will it be distributed, or does it just disappear? That's the question.
Can you repeat that one more? Actually, Mr. Burrell, if you want to come up and just answer that, because nobody will be able to hear it, basically. You want to come up and ask that question again?
I can talk loud enough.
Yeah, that's true.
Who's gonna take the ownership of the 6% every year? Or are we gonna let it evaporate?
I think you already answered
Is
it.
it going to the state of Arizona, and do they get to distribute it instead of us?
In my opinion, it's already gone, but that's what I already said.
Yeah,
It's
it's,
gonna be remarketed. That's straight stealing. That's what we wanna know.
I'm going to say simply answer it, it goes back to the aquifer.
Will it be distributed?
I don't have an answer to that.
You don't have an answer to that. You don't have an answer to what you're doing with my equity?
If you guys want to pose another question, because obviously this is being video, or come on, it's broadcasted live right now, and then we're going to have an internet access to it later, and so some of the discussion isn't being heard by the video guy. So if you guys want to rewrite that question and bring it up, we can ask it again so everybody can hear it, and we'll address it if you'd like,
Or make a comment.
or make a comment later, and we can address it then.
Can I try to answer it, and if the answer's wrong, either of you are correct?
You'd have to come up to the mic and answer it if you'd like. And if you'll just introduce yourself as to who you are.
I'm Brian Betcher. I'm the General Manager of Maricopa Stanfield Irrigation and Drainage District. My understanding of what happens to that 6% is that it goes to no one. It does not go to the state. It doesn't go to a developer. It doesn't go to a farmer. If you have a whole group of ag land that chooses not to exercise their right to extinguish that credit, all that means is the next year you have 6% less groundwater that you can use for your development if you choose to develop. So what happens is it requires someone to bring in more surface water to develop as years go by. That water is not 6% of your water as a farmer that goes to somewhere else. Joe's answer, I think, it stays in the aquifer. And what happens is the water that's still underground, that's been left there, is still available for all those pumping rights that have the ability to come in and pump that groundwater, both farmers and developers. It's just a new development is going to have to come in and probably bring a little bit more surface water with them to go with a reduced amount of groundwater that they can pump. That groundwater, 6% does not get taken and given to anybody, it just stays underground. It means you can't rely as much on groundwater for your development as you used to. That close? All right.
Do you guys want to make any more comments?
That's perfect.
All right. Next question. What is the formula to be used for compensating water right holders for the taking of their equity? For the 207 rule, Proposition 207 rule.
Repeat that again?
What is the formula to be used for compensating water right holders for the taking of their equity?
Well, obviously, at this point in time, there's no method to do that, and it's still a legal question whether that would even apply or not. But to me, you're devaluing your land annually, and it would seem like it would be worth exploring that venue. But I don't think anybody up here can answer a legal question with authority. So,
next question. To whom do we direct our letters and phone calls who can affect a policy change?
got two of them in the room.
Me. I'll leave a set of my cards. I'll be the contact for Arizona Department of Water Resources. So feel free to contact me if you wish.
Mr. Powell?
We also have two state representatives in the room right now that are on the Water and Ag Council, I think. So I think we're very fortunate to have them both present right now.
And while we're on that, we might as well introduce them. We have Frank Pratt and TJ Shope as well. Well, Mr. Pratt is not here. As well as Steve Miller, our supervisor. Those were late introductions, I apologize. Next question. Prior to the formation of the Department of Water Resources, didn't the water right go with the land? If that is true, why don't we abolish the Department of Water Rights?
Technically, before Department of Water Resources, there were no groundwater rights. So it was...
Created by the same legislation.
Right. At the same time that in 1980 that the Groundwater Management Act created DWR, it also created grandfathered groundwater rights. So...
Next question, and I think this one's for you, Jeff. What is your opinion about leaving extinguished conversions at 100% and just let agriculture phase out as it becomes less sustainable?
I'm not likely to give an opinion question or an opinion answer, I'll say.
How about what is the validity about leaving extinguished conversions at 100% and just let agriculture phase out as it becomes less sustainable? It's probably more what they were looking for.
I see. That's one way of looking at it. Yeah, if you, our mission is to preserve groundwater, both for ag uses and for municipal and industrial in the future. And that's what we're trying to do. That's why the changes in the Assured Water Supply Rule were put into place, to try and reduce the amount of groundwater that was going to be withdrawn and try and, slow down the withdrawal of groundwater so that there is some for the future. So that is what the intent of the Assured Water Supply Rule is, and that's what our agency's mission is.
Next question. If there are too many extinguishment credits to be filled currently, why are you creating a new market for them? This will obviously stimulate exchange and use. We can still farm if existing credits are sold. After 2054, we will not have any anyways.
The credits themselves don't. If you extinguish property or extinguish a grandfathered right after 2054, then there are no extinguishment credits that result from that. But the credits that are being created before then, those don't automatically expire in 2054. I'm not sure if that's what the question was, but I wanted to make that point. Extinguishment credits do continue that exist now. Those can continue to exist after 2054 unless they are used to pledge toward an assured water supply.
What can we do to stop this from going into effect?
It is already in effect. If we'll be happy to discuss alternatives with folks, but the things that we'd be looking for would be, is everyone in agreement, and is the aquifer going to be damaged? Is it going to protect the aquifer? That's the thing that we're after.
Mr. Powell?
Depending on the comments and kind of the direction of the crowd, we would probably entertain having a future meeting, maybe at the property or somewhere, and exploring what methods we could work with the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and maybe meet with GUAC members that could at least hear some comments from the group and what their concerns are.
A couple of them just did.
Yep. Are there any further questions that anybody has? If there's no more questions, we'll just move on to the comment section. Like I said, if anybody wants, feel free if you want. This was just trying to get this in order. The first person I'm going to call, well, I guess what I'll ask for as far as ground rules, when you come up, please introduce yourself, speak, or tell us who you're speaking on behalf, whether it's yourself or affiliation of an organization. And with that being said, the first person up would be Anna Kennedy, Arizona Farm Bureau.
Boy, can everybody see me?
Yeah.
And for the purposes of full disclosure, I am Anna Kennedy, representing the Arizona Farm Bureau. The guy behind me, Richie Kennedy, is my brother, and I am a longtime Pinal County resident. Let me begin by just saying that we respect the decisions that have gone into shaping water policy in Pinal County. Years of work and compromise have gone into the structure that exists today. Those who worked on it, some who have passed away, deserve our gratitude. I'm talking about legislators, city councilmen, boards of supervisor members, irrigation district leaders, and of course, Pinal County citizens. From agriculture's perspective, Pinal led the way on conservation with drip irrigation and field topography. But the issue that the state is facing today is even more pronounced than it was in 1980, and that is, where is the growth going to occur, as Mr. Powell alluded to earlier. A long-held principle of the Farm Bureau is that development should be occurring on irrigated agricultural land or land that has an historical water use within an AMA. That was the tenet of the 1980 Groundwater Code. In 1980, agriculture gave up its right to put groundwater to a beneficial use, and instead was given a permit to use a restricted amount. Agriculture also was not allowed to put new land into production. In addition to that, if your farm was within a city service area, you had no groundwater right to transfer with your land. Now, a provision in the code that gave agriculture some solace was that farmers that lived or farmed outside the city service area had a right to transfer those irrigation grandfathered rights with the sale of their land. Nothing in that section talked about extinguishment of that right. It is the rules that DW operates under that deals with extinguishment credits. And Pinal County may decide that it needs to revisit those statutes or those rules. And in addition to that, the irrigation districts may not be able to seek another amendment, but that doesn't mean that those of you here in the room would not be able to. The I-10 corridor of Pinal County Pinal County has farmland and livestock operations that have been developed and managed water for several generations. The goal has always been to grow with the understanding that agriculture would be replaced by homes and non-ag commerce. There is water and energy infrastructure in place here through the irrigation and electric districts. In addition, there is a rail right-of-way as well as Interstate 10. Ultimately, the two overriding issues that we have here is, number one, protecting the local water supply, and number two, managing where the growth in this area is going to occur. Thank you. Any comment?
Thank you, Anna. Earlier I had mentioned we're going to keep the comments to 3 minutes, but we have plenty of time and not trying to drag this thing out any later than it would be. But I think there might be an opportunity for some of you guys, if you guys have comments and then want to ask questions, I think we can probably have time to do that as well. The next person on the list to speak is Brian Betcher, General Manager of MSIDD.
I already had a chance to pop up here. Just a brief bit of history. As a young shining engineer in 1980, I started working on these projects for irrigation districts as part of Bookman Edmondson Engineering. That's right when the groundwater law was being implemented, and we worked directly with Herb Dishlip and Tom Carr down here because we were trying to figure out what land was going to be eligible and what land we were going to be able to provide Colorado River water to while they were developing and implementing the groundwater law. So I've been with this for quite some time. I had the opportunity to be part of that subcommittee group that worked on behalf of the GUAC with all different sorts of water sectors to try and develop something that made some sense. And what Ms. Kennedy said here before was very, very true. In the original 1980 law, you had a value of extinguishment credit with the idea and the intent that when farmland developed, development would be replaced on farmland, and so you would reduce overall water use, hopefully, and that was a good thing for the aquifer. Great. What I think has been understated is in 1995, when the Assured Water Supply rules were passed statewide, and it was mentioned correctly that in the Phoenix AMA and Tucson AMA, their reductions in extinguishment credits are very severe. By 2025, they're completely gone. So agricultural land in those AMAs has no extinguishment credits left. Pinal AMA is much better off going all the way out to 2054 as we have right now. But in 1995, it was determined, and in 1995 there wasn't a lot of development going on, so I don't know that anybody understood what it meant when 125 gallons per capita per day was granted for any land anywhere in the county to develop on. I sat there in a meeting with Jim Polis of Robeson Communities, got up on the whiteboard and said, okay, here's why we don't need ag land to develop anymore. He went through the calculation and said, we just need a little bit, okay? One of the main goals in 2000 when we sat here is to try and set that right. That was a huge error that was being perpetrated on this particular county and this AMA. That was undone completely to where there's now a smaller groundwater allowance that is available to everybody with the idea of bringing the value back to ag land. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I think this is very important. One of the things we looked at was if you kept the 1.5 acre foot per acre extinguishment credit that you had in 2000 and did not reduce it over time, and you had a strong development curve, the Department of Water Resources has to determine how much groundwater there is left underground to dedicate to subdivisions as you go along to grant a 100-year water supply. They were looking at projections that would said, very quickly we will get to a point where there's no more groundwater to allocate, so either you bring 100% renewable supplies with you to develop, or you cannot develop. Part of the goal, and whether or not this group hit it right or not, was to try and say, how do we get as much renewable water into this county as we possibly can, because we're already starting behind the 8 ball. We didn't have the big cities to get the long-term contracts to begin with. Arizona Water Company's got some. Florence has got some. Eloy has got some. Casa Grande does not. City of Maricopa does not. Okay? So you've got a finite supply of water underground. This is your birthright. How do you manage it? One of the goals of this group was to say, how do we provide the greatest benefit for the most amount of land for the greatest period of time? How do we do it? We ended up with this product. Is it perfect? Probably not. But that's the goal of what we tried to do. Now I have to say something on behalf of the irrigation districts. We are so much farther better off now, and the ag economy has been extended and its vitality maintained far beyond what was anticipated in the early 80s when the feasibility reports were written saying we're going to build these canal projects to bring CAP water in here. Okay? You have left so much water remains underground now that never would have been there. We were on track to pump ourselves dry. And some people had because they couldn't afford to pump anymore. So we've extended that vitality. So this law was an intent to make that better. I enjoy Mr. Powell, and I would only dispute one thing on future property values. Okay? If you're holding farmland and you keep it at 100% and you don't allow that extinguishment credit to reduce over time to incentivize bringing in CAP water, there will be a point in time where DWR will say you can't develop, there's no more groundwater. Then everybody else's land has no extinguishment credit value. It goes away completely. It's gone. It's completely gone. Or you extend it as far out as you can and try and get as many people to benefit, and there's always going to be that first person that somebody says no to. And I don't know who that's going to be, and I don't know where that location's going to be. Will public policy change and more surface water is brought in for ag? Well, I hope so. We got to do it, but I can't tell you that's going to happen. I could argue that maybe future values are greater because of this law and this rule in the future than they would be if there's no water to give for development. So that may be a rhetorical question for you folks to think about. That's what I think the big picture is for you folks. If you're going to change it, don't make it worse. Okay, make sure if you're going to try and change it, work with the department. You get something that improves what you got, but I think your future values are better than you think they are. And I can't tell you what that relative thing is, but I will tell you when you get to 2025, you'll have a groundwater extinguishment credit if you want to develop. Tucson and Phoenix will not.
Are there any more comments? Kelly? Just come on up.
Hi, my name is Kelly Dugan, and I am with Dubrick Dairy. I just wanted to say that my family is a third-generation dairy farmers. We've been here, we've been in Pinal County, we've also been in Maricopa County, and this is where we want to be. This is where we want to farm for the rest of our lives. This is where I want my children to have the opportunities to have a dairy farm and keep that here in our community. I believe that Pinal County wants to have agriculture here. I believe that Pinal County, that we provide labor. I believe that we provide revenue. I believe that we take care of our land. And I want to ask the question, if we get rid of agriculture here in Pinal County, where will we get our food? If Maricopa and Tucson or Pima County, if they've already gotten rid of all these credits and they're already phasing out their agriculture, is Arizona going to get their food from California or from New Mexico? Are we going to ship it in? Where are we going to get our cotton? So what I'm asking is that we come up with a plan that includes agriculture instead of stamping them out or phasing us out. We would like to work with the developers and maybe require that they buy the land, give them incentives. Hey, you know what, if you buy here, you'll get, maybe farmers will work with them if they buy the land that already has water on it. But they're not doing that. There's Anthem, where they're building out in the middle of nowhere and then using our water that we could have used for agriculture and moving it somewhere else. So I would think if you stand up, if you say something and let other people know, let the other farmers that you know, that this is going on and that we care, and let the people that don't even have a farm, just tell them and say, if you value small family farms, because I think a lot of people do, especially right now. If they value small family farms, speak up, make a difference, say something, because this is going to happen. And I would like my children to be able to have this in the future.
Would anybody else like to make a comment? Please come up. Hang on a second, we got two coming up. You can wait? Okay.
Hello, I'm Rodney Shedd, and I represent myself, and I own rat farms. I'm a third-generation farmer. And the reason why you guys are probably here is because I've been screaming about this for quite a while, and pretty much to deaf ears. I've met with the director, Sandy, of the Department of Water Resources. I've been to the GUAC meetings. I asked Sandy, I says, how do you change this? And she says, you have to go to the GUAC board. It's got to come from the people. And so you guys are the people here. And so if you agree, disagree, make your voice heard, because my comment does not represent you. I've learned this the hard way. So I got up in front of the cotton growers meeting when Sandy was there, and I told her that this was socialism, that was flat stealing. And I still believe that today. You heard it. For the public good. The water is for the public good. Man, we need, as citizens, as Americans, we need to stand up. The state of Arizona, they already control our animals. I can't go shoot a deer on my property. God gave us those animals to take dominion over, to use. I just think that this state is just getting a little bit out of control. And if you agree with me, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. But make your voice heard. This is America, and our voice should be heard. And that's all I have.
Next speaker.
Good evening. My name is Bill Garfield. I'm president of Arizona Water Company. I couldn't let Brian be the only one up here speaking on behalf of people who participated in the subcommittee. The process was about 3 years or more in length, and we struggled with how do we keep and bring water into this AMA. We need water. And what I saw happening in some of the other active management areas through the groundwater replenishment district, I participated in their stakeholder process in 2005, 2004. All the water the replenishment district is bringing into the state is going to Phoenix and Tucson. And I thought we needed to do something here to bring water into this AMA. Our allocation here is under 11,000 acre feet. Eloy and Florence, probably a few, 3,000 or 4,000 between the two of them. That's not nearly enough water for what we're going to need in the future to sustain homes and businesses in the future. So the subcommittee, we really were trying to find a solution, the best we could, within the regulatory framework of the Department of Water Resources. I hate regulations. As a business, we have way too many regulations, but we're trying to find within that framework something that would work for this AMA that would be able to say, in answer to Councilman Powell's question, where's the water going to come from? Maybe there's only enough water for 1 million people, and maybe they're looking at 6 million people. Well, you can talk about credits and how you're going to account for this in the regulatory framework, but ultimately we need water here for what the future of this county and this AMA is going to be. And that's what the subcommittee was trying to do. And as I agree with Brian, is it the perfect system? From what I'm hearing, probably not. And I agree with the public process. We had meetings for years. I was in the committee. I was the chairman of the subcommittee. The first chairman died in the process, okay? So I was tagged with next, you're it. And I'm hoping that wasn't my death sentence here. But I can tell you that the subcommittee worked in all good faith to try to find a solution for this AMA and not create problems. But maybe this is a better solution. I'm more than welcome to hear another view of how we might achieve a solution. So I just thought that point should be made. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to make a comment?
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Bill O'Neill. Not a farmer, don't have any water rights. I'm just a guy that was born and raised here, surrounded by farms. I can remember going to Evergreen. I was in the first class of the first graders that went there. You'd look across there, and there were those cotton fields, surrounded. And I'm 5 generations in this town. I got my granddad's buried out there, my dad's buried out there. I ain't buried there yet, but one day I am. I've got kids that live here, and all my grandkids live here. That's 5 generations deep. Proud to be here. Let me just first say that I so appreciate you, Dick. My God, you talk about a guy who's got deep roots himself. Front page of the Dispatch, I've held this thing since May 26th, because that's the only way I've even heard about this. And I appreciate the Dispatch, putting it on the front page where we could see it. And I appreciate the opportunity to be informed. I don't discount at all when you have government organizations, because frankly, well, let me give you a, for those up there, I'm a lawyer, I know nothing about water. I'm a judge, I'm not involved in this. I work for the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court's not involved in this. So I'm just talking Bill O'Neill, not any of the others. I appreciate when people come together and they enter into agreements. Otherwise, civilization doesn't work very well. At the same time, when it unintentionally works in quiet and things come into a place where so many like you, and frankly, a guy like me that is not involved in farming, doesn't really even know that things are happening. That's a government that begins to shake you and make you worried. Now, we started out, and I appreciate that you remembered that old flag up there. We give a pledge, and they put that pledge in place so that every time that flag unfurled, that it would sort of remind us that there were generations before us that stood tall, that communicated face to face, not just by text, not just by email, but rather face to face, and communicated with one another. And you would hear, learn, and then exchange ideas and grow. I'm troubled with a guy that's been in government like me for 23 years. I don't think it's intentional. I don't mean to suggest that. Dick is always great about it. You're right. None of this is intentional this way. I don't believe that. I think people have the best interest. But you know, when that's the way you find out, you're reminded that that flag, it is not our grandfathers, it is not our fathers who keep it strong. It is we who are living and talking and interacting today. I don't have a perfect opinion on any of this, except to say that when a group is precluded from even trying to amend something, that's government at its worst. You're not precluded. These type of forums, thank you, Dick. Seriously. We need to keep meeting and talking and interacting, because the balance between agriculture and just bringing in hordes of people at some point, you exactly hit it right. You know what? You're going to have so many people here, there will be no water regardless. That doesn't work either. But there's a balance. People come here in large part because of the fields, because of the agriculture. And for me, personally, or everybody else, I like eating at Mike's place, and I like the fact that he's got food, and you guys are growing it. So let's keep meeting.
Are there any more comments? Mr. Burrell?
Arnold Burrell, Burrell & Burrell Farms. 4 years ago, I talked my son into quitting a great job in town and coming back to the farm. It rejuvenated me. We got so excited. We went out and spent several $1 million on a farm. Very exciting times, right during all these agreements and all these, I'm going to say just like it is, while this gag order was in place. This was just brought to my attention a few weeks ago. My son and I, we work every day on the farm. We change water together. We set cultivators. We do whatever. And I can't look my son in the eye. I don't know what I signed him up for. It's this particular issue, as you can tell, is shaking me to the core. And I don't have an answer for what his expectations might be about our future. As we all know, the conversion rights were always the ace in the hole. Bankers lend on those rights based on those rights. We always have them as the last out. That's not what we do. We're farmers. We don't intend to use those rights. I don't think that we're so arrogant that we would say that we deserve to farm above communities growing, population coming. We're not going to stand in the way of commerce. But don't steal from me. Buy it from me if you need it. I'll gladly give it up. I just want to let one last thing go before I step down. The hardest time to steal is the first time. And then when you get comfortable with it, Katie, bar the door. I don't know where we're headed.
Are there any more comments from the floor? So with that, I guess as being chair, one of the lucky things you get to do is do the last comments. And as you came in, you signed up letting us know you were here. And so hopefully with that, we're going to take it that you're willing to be involved and want to stay involved and show up to the next meeting. And we will take your notices that, or the information you gave us, and we will notify you just as we've done before and just with the new information you've given us, letting you know what the next meeting's going to be. I think you can kind of hear a consensus here that some of this is done without a lot of people at the table, and I think that's a lot of issue that people have right now, is that only certain people were at the table. And I think that's a big fear for a lot of people out there, and rightly so. And with that being said, and I'm going to say this on behalf of just myself being Richie Kennedy, I'm not a farmer, I'm a feedlot operator, and so I don't deal with the farms directly, as most of you guys do. And so I don't have to deal with irrigation districts. But looking forward into the future, irrigation districts are going to be here with or without you guys. And I think there's a story out there that, or I should say there's a model out there that these irrigation districts are after, and I'm going to call it the SRP model. They're going to be here whether you're here or not, and so whether or not their true interest is in with you right now, that's up to you guys, the members, the board members, the end users of that water to determine. And I hope you take that home and think about it and show up to the next meeting. And hopefully that next meeting will be with the GUAC board, and hopefully we'll have a direction as to which way we want to go with this. We will be contacting you. And with that being said, I guess I'm going to thank everybody for showing up and trying to be informed and trying to be involved.
Just when you're done,
one more final comment. I guess it wasn't the last one. Mr. Powell's got one more final comment.
I just want to thank everybody so much for being here and the willingness to explore and to try to do give and take. Bill Garfield and others expressed. I think that if we continue to work on this issue, that we can make it better. I don't think we could make it much worse. So I would like to.
And Mr. Powell's right. As Judge O'Neill said, I mean, it takes people to make things happen, and that's why you're all here. And I'd hope you guys would give yourselves a round of applause, and everybody that's up here at this table that answered all your questions, and thank them for showing up to be able to answer your questions. And hopefully they'll keep coming to our meetings that we keep having for this, and that we can actually get something done. So thank you, everybody.
Good job.
Thank you, Mr. Powell.